Okay, so I see a good number of people. Now, the first question across the board, many of you had this one question, that is, what is the best study plan for CAT 24 from now onwards? Some of you have even been specific regarding, how can I finish the CAT syllabus, entire syllabus, in about 3 months' time? Okay, what should be the daily schedule and strategy? And also, how do I balance college and work with CAT prep? Now, of course, there are different types of students amongst you. There are, of course, graduates going to college, studying at college. There are or office goers too. And therefore, your schedules are very different. Nevertheless, what I'm going to do is start with what can be an ideal plan, first of all, right? Ideally, in terms of skill building, right? In terms of having the right level of aptitude for the different sectionals, what should be done? I'm going to start with that. And then we can look at how we can customize it to each one of us, depending on what our schedules are or what our requirements are, what our weaknesses are, and what our strengths are. Okay. Now, ideally, you know that CAT has these three sectionals, which means that I need to, and they all have equal weightage, right? Equal time given and equal weightage kind. So I have to be good at all three sectionals, which means that every day I will have to make sure that I touch on the required skill sets for each of these sectionals, okay? So whether it's quant, whether it's verbal, whether it's a DI and LR. Now, so ideal scenario, we would speak about, say you do 1 or 2 RCs. 2 RCs is what we usually recommend, 2 RCs every day, 2 sets of DI, or maybe a set of DI and a set of LR, and a few QA questions that are to be done on an everyday basis, right? So that you are touching the skill sets required, or at least polishing the required skill sets of all of these areas, okay? Now, there can be many things coming in, right? Maybe you're not able to put in time for 2 RCs every day, or 2 DI sets, or 1 DI or 1 LR and several QA questions, because perhaps you have a lecture to attend. Let's assume you are enrolled in a batch at IMS or somewhere, and you have a lecture, a CAT prep lecture to attend. This is apart from your college and office schedules that I'm referring to. You have a lecture to attend. Or let's say you have the homework related to that lecture to be done, correct? Which means you'd be giving a lot of time to either the lecture, the 2 hours lecture or so, or solving, maybe as far as the IMS curriculum goes or courseware goes, solving the practice exercise of that lecture, or solving the benchmarking test connected with that lecture. So depending on how much time you're putting in for the solving and improving your understanding of one particular chapter or one particular concept, you can plan out the other things, okay? Ideally, you have to keep all of these things going parallelly. That is, there is a homework or there is a practice set that is connected with one chapter that is taught. And what are these chapters? So you have a chapter in VARC, you have a chapter in QA, right? You have a chapter in DI where you are taught certain concepts. Once you are taught those concepts, you need to practice them so that you completely understand the concept, the entire details connected with that concept, and the required skill sets for it, which is where that practice exercise comes in. And then there is a test that you take, which is your benchmarking test, to see if you are good enough at that skill set. Have you really understood the concept, and are you good enough at that? So now a practice exercise of, say, about 20 questions or 25 questions could take you anything between 1.5 hours to 2 or 2.5 hours, depending on the topic, depending on the difficulty level of the concept. So let's say today I'm doing a QA set, right? I'm practicing one practice exercise of QA. 2 hours of my time might be utilized there. So I will not want to do any additional QA practice. Instead, I will focus on ensuring that that minimum of VARC, which is 2 RCs maybe. And if I don't have much time, I will probably do at least one. And that one DI set or one LR set, and if I don't have time for 2 sets, I will do at least one, right? I will make sure that at least so much is balanced out, okay? So ideally, you have to complete the courseware. And when I'm talking regarding the courseware that we give to IMS students, I'm referring to the class concepts being taught, the theory. You have the class exercise that is discussed in class, which is part of that conceptual learning, then the practice exercise and the benchmarking test, right? So in an ideal scenario, we always say that you've got to be on pace with your current schedule. That is, make sure that you have completed the courseware connected with one lecture before the next lecture of that sectional starts, so that you are thoroughly prepared with the previous concept. And if there is any interrelation with the previous concept and the next one, you're able to understand that well. And also, there is a sense of completion that you get when you are going in sync with the schedule, with your homework or required practice exercises done, so that you don't feel overwhelmed with a lot of backlog left. Right, the very thought that, look, I have a lot of things to catch up with. I've yet to sharpen my skill sets for, let's say, these 2 QA chapters done. I'm not very clear with the concepts. I need to revise, etc. So that feeling doesn't come in, and you're able to relate to the upcoming schedules, right? The upcoming chapters. So ideal scenario, I would say, if you're looking at 1 RC a day, you need nothing more than 15 to 20 minutes. Some of you are able to solve an RC in about 12 minutes these days. Some of you take 15 minutes. Some of you might even take 20 minutes to actually read through an RC currently. If you're starting and your VARC is not strong, you might take that much time, which is absolutely fine. And in analyzing whether you've gone right with solving of those questions, you will probably take another 5 minutes, perhaps reread a bit of that RC again, or sometimes you might even reread that entire RC especially if you've got too many questions wrong, right? Reread that entire RC and come back and revisit those questions, which is like a 20-25 minute, at worst, perhaps a 30 minutes. Likewise, for one DI set or one LR set, keep aside a 20 minutes. In worst case scenario, if you're slow, if you need to perhaps look at the solutions and come back and readdress a few things, relook at something, maybe a half an hour, 30 minutes, which is like a 1 hour at least kept aside for the other 2 sectionals, and that 1.5 to 2 hours that you're going to invest in practicing questions of a certain chapter, right? Now, this is what is expected. If you consider the total number of concepts that you have to be actually prepared with, yes, there will be a higher dosage of QA, almost twice as much as the other 2 sectionals that you need to prepare for, which means that you will invest more of your time in solving QA, of course, particularly understanding the concepts, practicing them, taking some tests and sharpening your skills there. There will be a lot of revision as well. I'll talk about revision later. So in an ideal scenario, you will invest more time in QA. Perhaps, let's say if you're considering 6 days in the week, let's keep aside your Sunday, 6 days in the week. You might even take 3 days to focus on QA, especially if you're weak in QA, right? But if you're not so weak in QA and you're able to manage things well, you have a strong math background, then it's fine. However, considering the number of concepts that we have, you generally require that much time, okay? So let's assume that we have about 70, 75 topics in all. Even at the rate of, say, 3 topics that you finish, most batches tend to have 3 lectures in a week. There can be variants, of course. There are batches that will have more lectures depending on when you start and how that course needs to be paced out for you. But typically, speaking, about 3 lectures in a week, which means at least 3 topics, right? So even if you are done with about 3 topics in a week, perhaps by July or so, you will be done with your entire courseware, which is an ideal time because August onwards, you will want to focus on your test-taking skills. And test-taking skills will require a lot of revisions, a lot of, coming back, iterations of whatever concepts were taught to you. a lot of the SIMCATs taken, analysis done, your strengths and weaknesses identified, plenty of things like this, right? So ideally, this is what we say. And of course, there has to be that reading component other than an RC or long stretches of reading from, say, a book, or reading some articles from newspapers, reading some good essays from online sources, standard sources. Now, these are things that we encourage you to do, right? Now, this is the ideal study plan. So customize this as per your schedule, okay? There can be, say, some of you who have, say, 5 or 6 hours of college work, and perhaps some other commitments like your assignments to be done or something else happening in college. Now, even if you keep aside these 2 to 3 hours, you don't really need about 2 hours for every chapter and exercises of the chapter. You might even need 1.5 hours for certain chapters, particularly, say, VA chapters, or sometimes even DI or LR chapters, right? So keep aside those 1.5 to 2 hours, plus that additional practice, everyday practice that you're doing, that is about an hour. So roughly, if you're able to pull out about 2.5 hours per day, that will more than suffice. Now, if you're not able to do this on weekdays, particularly for WorkX people who work extensively, I'm sure we have the weekends where we can manage more. Okay. Now, there can be a lot of related questions. Please do post your questions and let me know if there's something related that comes up. Okay. Now, I'm going to take this ahead. We can always come back to this question because this is the biggest question that you have in your minds, right? So ideally, to summarize this, as I said, you'll need about a 2 to 2.5 hours time every day to work on the ideal requirements and build that momentum, build and polish your skills, improve on your skills, and build that momentum to enter the test series so that you can start doing really well there, okay? And as I said, the ones who cannot do this on the weekdays might even want to consider taking time off on that Saturday and Sunday and maximizing on those days, okay? Which means perhaps that practice exercise that you were supposed to do on a weekday, you shift it to a Saturday. That benchmarking test that you were supposed to do on a weekday, you shift that to a Saturday or a Sunday, right? And a benchmarking test ideally is about a 40-50 minutes time. Now, this benchmarking test is a chapter-based test that lets you know whether you really understood the skills part of that particular chapter. Ideally, the solving time is 40 to 50 minutes, but the analysis time can even go up to an hour because you might have got a lot of questions wrong. You might have not attempted a few questions. You might want to check the solutions for all of that and resolve everything, right? Remember, test taking is about learning, is about improving, right? I'm going to look at the next question now. I don't see any related questions coming, but if there's something that you want to understand further here, customize, have a specific requirement, please let me know, okay? Now, let's take this ahead. Now, this is another thing that I've seen across the board. You know, a lot of students talking about this. My quantitative skills aren't strong. What can I do to improve them for CAT? How and when to revisit the chapters? Now, this is the last part is a very important one. We all understand that unless you are thorough with the concept, unless you start studying from the very basics, start with chapters, each chapter, right? You study each chapter, you focus on each chapter really well, give it sufficient time, you will not really build on your quantitative skills. Even if, let's say, eventually you might want to leave out a certain area because that is not your strength. But we do know that there is no compromising when it comes to arithmetic, geometry. Geometry and arithmetic have actually dominated, except for last year where we saw a huge presence of algebra as well, right? Now, there can be, say, certain areas, perhaps modern maths, that you're not comfortable with. However, when it comes to learning concepts, you have to put in the required time. Ultimately, quantitative skills is just about ensuring that you understand the topic, the concept really well. You understand how the application of that concept is to be done, which requires practice. Ultimately, you will realize that in all of these sectionals, practice is key, okay? Maybe you need to invest more time. Your quantitative skills cannot be all that bad. After all, you did study math in school. Perhaps you had a disconnect for, say, 4 years or 5 years, and that's why you need to go back to fundamentals. Now, if you're part of the IMS courseware, of course, you have those pre-class videos, those concept videos that are given, which very clearly explain the basics to you. Please be very thorough with that. Those concept videos will give you absolute insight on basic ideas. And it's important that you're prepared with them, prepared with the theory, go through the theory before you attend that lecture, because otherwise you may not be able to relate to a lot of things, right? So the absolute basics are important. Start with the basics, be thorough with them, work strongly on your calculation abilities, right? Your mental calculations, keep working on them. Perhaps you could keep aside, say, a half an hour every day, 15, 20 minutes every day, simply to work on your quantitative skills or your calculation, mental calculation. Practice is key. Okay. Now, the second part of this is, I think there is one more question related to this is, how do I revisit the chapters? Because I tend to forget when I advance with chapters. I'm sure all of your quant faculty will tell you that you need to maintain a particular a notebook where you write down the basic theory or the basic formula, etc., where you make a note of important things, right? Now, that is an important step, of course. But then we always say that, let's say you finished a set of chapters. Maybe we call it module 1, the first book of QA chapters, or the first set of arithmetic chapters. By the time you move to the second module, you start with a revision of the first module. This is quite important for every one of us. Even if my quantitative skills are not very weak, right? I'm fairly okay with QA. I will still need to go back and revise. And why is this important? Because yes, we tend to forget, right? And QA is all about familiarity with concepts. Unless you have that absolute familiarity with concepts, you really can't bring in the necessary speed when it comes to application, right? Bringing in that necessary speed to apply these concepts to the different levels of questions will mean that you revise them, right? Once a certain set of chapters are done, or let's assume module 1 is done, you will, in your everyday weekly schedule, identify at least 2 slots or 3 slots if you're really very weak, right? That slot can be just a 1-hour slot, perhaps, not a very long one, where you go back, revisit the theory part, the formulas, the basic concepts, look at, say, the solved examples, look at a few good questions and resolve those questions, right? I always equate this to a refreshing process, right? Just as you refresh a computer screen or a program, right? You refresh the entire concept in your mind. And that refreshing activity is not similar to learning. Learning takes a lot of time, but the refreshing doesn't take a lot of time, right? Now, usually we say, let's say you're targeting finishing your portions by the entire curriculum by July or August, right? July, ideally. By the time you reach July, along with studying the concepts, right, along with studying of each of the chapters, you will also work on at least one round of revision, okay? So by the time, let's say the last module is going on, you are revising the previous module, perhaps the third module, as when module 4 is happening. And immediately after module 4 is completed, you revise that. So probably from August onwards, you start another round of revision for QA. The more iterations, we call them, right? The more times you revise these concepts, the better for you, because that speed only comes with absolute familiarity. Familiarity is only built with practice and revision. And unless you keep coming back, right? And by the time of July, or by the time of, say, even June or so, you will realize that because you'll be taking so many tests by then, maybe not too many SimCats per se. Yes, there will be quite a few mock papers that you will write, full-fledged mock papers, but you will also be doing a lot of, say, section tests or chapter-based tests, module tests, etc., which will give you sufficient insight on where do you think your strengths lie. Is there a particular area or a couple of topics in one particular area that you're weak with, right? And when you identify that, maybe you can start focusing less on those areas, right? Let that not be a large number of topics. It could perhaps be just one topic out of the 4 or 5 that we usually speak of. Arithmetic and geometry, algebra, these will have to be your strengths. So perhaps you start focusing more on what you consider your strengths and try to enhance them and build your aptitude such that you're able to do more than the moderate questions, because these are your strength areas. You're already doing the easy questions and perhaps the moderate ones too, because these are your strength areas. Now you work harder on them so that even certain rather difficult, not very difficult, rather difficult questions also you'll be able to solve. Ultimately, remember, right, as everybody says and as the general understanding goes, CAT is not about solving all questions, whether it's QA, VARC, or DILR. CAT is about ensuring that you recognize, you identify the easy and medium questions, right? Out of the 22 questions, even if you are able to focus on the easy and moderate questions and solve them well, right? Solve them correctly, that serves the purpose. Out of, let's say, the 24 questions of ERC, if you're able to figure out, select the easy ones, the easy RCs, the easy verbal ability questions and solve them. Likewise for DILR, that works and that serves the purpose. We're actually not targeting beyond 50% of the total score, perhaps, right? Especially if I'm looking at a 98, 99 percentile. Even if, let's say, I'm able to get 13, 14 questions right in verbal, that serves the purpose. That can even take me to my 99 percentile. Even if I'm able to solve, say, 9, 10 questions in DILR and get them right, 9, 10 right questions, right? It serves the purpose. So selection, building on your strengths, identifying your strengths and your weaknesses, right? Building more and more on your strengths, that's very important, okay? And that recognition you should get somewhere by about June, July. You will already start recognizing them, as your modules and chapters are progressing. But sometime by, say, July, August, you will start really recognizing and identifying that these are my core strengths and I should work more on them, okay? Now, if there's anything related here, of course, we will take that up. A similar question that I saw was with regard to VRC, right? There was one specific question which seemed a slightly different concern. I'm going to address this as well. The VRC is not as evident as QA, right? You don't really see the output straight away. I always believe that when you solve something quantitative, right? When you understand the concept thoroughly, you've given it enough time, you solve different types of questions there, different approaches, shortcuts and everything. You see the results, they are visible. It's quite seen, black and white. However, your VRC output is not as clear, all right? Now, there are, depending on, our previous reading exposure, as well as our general exposure to language, our communication skills, our communication that, we were exposed to, the general, say, learning environment in our schools and colleges, all right? Based on all this, I have a certain level of language and understanding of the language, right? Now, it's important that I build myself from there. It could be anything at all. There can be students who are unable to read, say, a very simple Sudha Murthy novel, right, and understand it, or perhaps an article in a Times of India and not understand it. And I'm not even talking about the editorial in Times of India. And a simple news article and not understand it thoroughly. There can be students who can read far beyond that and understand it, who need a different level of preparation with the RC when it comes to RC. Now, whatever level that you are at, you have to understand that it's important that I invest a lot of time in reading, because there are a lot of skill sets connected with reading, which you don't recognize. And unless you practice, you don't really get that, okay? Now, there are students who would say that, okay, I have been reading RCs I've solved some RCs for the last 1 month, and still I'm not improving. Well, considering the level of language that you have in these RCs, the level of language that you have in CAT RCs, it is not something that you will reach overnight. Okay. There is also another aspect there. It's not simply about knowing the language and understanding it. It's about being able to connect the dots. It's about being able to connect the ideas as you're reading, logically understand what the author says in the first paragraph is linked, and how is it linked to what he says in the second paragraph, how he takes that ahead and why he takes that ahead in the third paragraph, right? Understanding the overall intentions, the purpose of the author, and his main point or argument. Now, all that requires a different level of training, okay? But to start with, you should at least focus on reading, and reading every day, all right? Now, reading every day, particularly for people who are weak at VRC, can even be, say, if you have the time, can even be 2 hours of reading, 1 hour of reading or 2 hours of reading. If you have the time, that is, yes. It could even be that you read some 20, 30 pages of a book every day, all right? At least in the initial stage for the next few months. And don't expect immediate results. Don't say that, look, I've been reading, so now I should understand. No, language doesn't work that way. Language works in a very subtle way. Your improvement happens to be very subtle. The growth is very subtle, but probably say 3 or 4 years down the line later, when you check, right, you'll find that your understanding has improved slightly, correct? Again, you might not be able to quantify that and say that this is exactly how I have improved, but there is an improvement. If you compare yourself to where you are currently and where you will end up being, say, 4 months down the line or so, your understanding will be far better, okay? Now, to get into the basic details here, focus on understanding sentences. Some of us try to study a lot of vocabulary quite inorganically, right? That is, I simply try to memorize words and understand their meaning. I don't try to look at the meanings of words in sentences while I'm reading an RC, right? While you're reading an RC, you may come across difficult words. During the process of reading, don't get into trying to understand the meaning, or don't stop that process of reading. Continue with that, right? Try to figure out, without knowing the meaning of the word, try to figure out what that sentence or the context is all about, right? Even without knowing the meaning of the word. There can be several words that you don't know. There are so many words in the English vocabulary, you may not know all of this. Million odd words, right? I may not understand the meanings of everything, but I'll still link it with the other words and try to understand what is being said, okay? So connecting, first of all, focus on understanding the phraseology of a sentence. When I say phraseology, it's the language, correct? What exactly is being communicated by a sentence like this? And that entire talk about that each sentence can be interpreted in different ways by different people, it's meaningless, right? It cannot, because every word has a specific meaning, and put some words together, those words will end up conveying something. That sentence will end up conveying something meaningful. It cannot mean multiple things. So understand the phraseology. So what I want people who are really weak at VRC to do is perhaps reread sentences, reread paragraphs till you understand them. So your initial phase of reading might go very slow. That's why I said some of us might even take 20 minutes to read a passage and understand it, which is absolutely fine. Because unless you get your mind to recognize what those sentences mean, what this language indicates or means, you can't really progress, right? It is not about the quantum or the number of RCs that I read. It's about training my mind to understand what it's reading, okay? So focus on perhaps long reading. Take anything that you understand. Don't read a book simply because everyone is talking about this book and I too need to read it. You should understand it. Don't go to an Aeon essay or a Guardian article just because everybody else is reading. Do you understand that? If you don't, start with something basic, right? Invest a little more time in reading. Focus on solving, say, 2 RCs every day and give that due time. Sometimes I may have solved an RC, but I find that out of 4 questions, I get 3 incorrect, which means I may come back to reread that RC because, somewhere my mind has not made the right connections. It hasn't understood well, right? And in this process of rereading that RC, right, I'm actually training my mind to read precisely, to read correctly, to connect the dots correctly and logically, right? So focus more on reading. Organically try to understand the vocabulary too. After your reading of an RC or reading of something, when you've stopped or when that RC solving has closed, identify those difficult words. What are the meanings of those difficult words? Write them down somewhere and have these words collected, the difficult vocabulary that you come across written down somewhere. So you have this process of revision too, okay? Because without revising, you just simply don't remember, right? You don't remember the meanings of words. You need to revise. You need to constantly revisit, okay? Now, at a later stage, once you have built or strengthened your efficiency in language, you might want to focus on understanding the question types, okay? It can be a parallel process because when you're solving RCs, you're also looking at question types, right? But a deeper understanding of those question types, what does a question stem mean? What type of question is it? What can be the expected answer? All right. How do I eliminate options? In other words, the logic involved, okay? Mere reading without an understanding of critical reasoning is meaningless, right? So to be able to understand the logic involved, critical reasoning, a deeper understanding of how correct critical thought works, right? These things are important. So for a student like this, who says that you want to restart your preparation for CAT 24, specifically because your VARC is what brought your overall score down, right? I think some of these tips should help you. But I want to also focus on the second part of your question, which is, please give me information on what to do and also about IMS. If I join IMS, how it would help me for CAT 24. Now, it depends on where you are, all right? I wish you had given me more information about where exactly you are with regard to your verbal, your language skills, one. What is your situation in life? Are you someone who's already gone through a classroom program and currently don't have time for another classroom program? You're working or your time is fully occupied. So I wanted more understanding of that. So I'm going to make a few assumptions here. Assuming that you went through a classroom program last year and this is the output that you got out of it, you might want to go back and revisit and see whether you really worked on improving your language. If you didn't really work on improving your language, perhaps you need to start with that. Now, do you really need a classroom program if you had taken one last year? If you hadn't utilized it best, then perhaps you need a classroom program, right? Or some program, perhaps a self-learning program that will give you high quality solving material, practice material, and an understanding of that practice material with the right kind of solutions, text or video solutions, right? A right kind of understanding of how to approach and how to understand this. So a self-learning program will help you, work on things at your own pace. However, if you think that you don't understand the sentences and the key ideas of an RC and you need guided practice, now that is perhaps where a classroom program will help you, right? Where you are part of the classes and you along with the faculty, you try to understand and make sense of RCs, right? You solve together. So it depends on where you are and how you would like to go take this ahead. Or alternatively, you can simply take a good test series, join our test series perhaps. Ultimately, you need to make sure that you have quality content to solve, that the content that you're solving is understood by you, because it's meaningless if you don't understand it, right? You are able to make sense of the content that you're solving. The solutions give you meaningful insights and correct the incorrect ways in which you were solving or comprehending, right? So this should be your focus. So this is how I think IMS will help you if you wish to, join IMS for verbal improvement, all right? Now, if there are further details that you want to discuss, you can please share. Now, this is another thing that I've come across, which is specific to college students, dealing with the backlog caused by college exams systematically, all right? So a student who is part of a classroom setup, right, a physical classroom, will end up maybe taking a break from the classes for, say, 2 weeks or 3 weeks for the duration of the exam. Now, how do I cope with the backlog? And that is a very overwhelming feeling. To have this feeling in the back of your mind that, look, I have so much more solving to be done. I have so much pending material and the others are ahead of me. You even go into a class with the feeling that maybe this concept explanation I'm not able to understand because it's linked with the previous session, right? This has to be planned well, okay? And since this word systematically is used here, how do you plan this well? Generally, after exams, particularly after, say, major exams, sometimes after mid-sems or end-sems, you tend to get a break, right? You tend to get a few days off. So after end-sems, if you have those few days off, you can always utilize that and go on an overdrive, make use of, say, 5 to 6 hours per day in order to, and divide the work properly. That is, allocate half a day to finishing, one chapter, the backlog of any one chapter, and the other half to complete the current or ongoing chapters and their homework. If you don't have that break, if you don't get a few days off, that can be a little challenging. There are multiple things that I want to suggest here. One is, perhaps if you are able to take a break, if the attendance factor is not, a big concern, maybe you can take a break for a day or two, or 2, 3 days, a few days, right? Merge it maybe with a weekend or so, and try to maximize and solve the pending chapters, right? For online students, my recommendation always is that don't really disconnect yourself from the lectures during your exams too, right? Do attend the lectures. You may not solve the practice exercises or the homework and the benchmarking test, but try to attend the lectures, right? Maybe I have a lecture today and I have an exam today, or I have a lecture the previous evening and I have an exam the next morning. Maybe in such cases, you might want to skip because you cannot compromise on your exams. College exams are extremely important. They don't keep happening every now and then. They happen just once in your life. So you'll want to focus on that. However, as much as possible, on the days, let's say 2 days before an exam and you have a lecture in the evening, please do attend the lecture. At least you are in touch with the chapters. Even if you're not going to solve the practice exercise or the benchmarking test, that's absolutely fine. You can always catch up with it later, okay? So for the ones who are not able to take a break, they don't get a college break, and you're not able to take a few days off because of attendance concerns, this can be a big challenge, okay? Maybe for the next 2 or 3 weeks, you might want to divide your weekdays into time allocated. So let's say I might even make it 3 days in a week to do backlog, particularly related to the chapters of this week, right? Let's say I have a connected chapter, particularly with QA. It can be a problem to attend a lecture without an understanding of some basic other concepts, right? So I will first check the schedule, upcoming schedule of this week. I have these 3 lectures. Now, what are the previous lectures of this particular chapter? Are they connected in some way? If yes, I'll take the 2 days of my practice time. I will focus on finishing that particular chapter because I have a lecture on Wednesday. So Monday and Tuesday, I focus on finishing the previous chapter, right? So we'll have to strike a balance there, okay? There can be times where, let's say, my ongoing lectures, I have a lecture this Wednesday And I know that next Monday, I have another lecture coming up, which is a part 2 of today's lecture, of Wednesday's lecture, which means I have to complete the homework of Wednesday's lecture before I attend Monday's lecture, right? So I have to strike a balance there, okay? What I would recommend is go on a slight overdrive here. That is, perhaps if you were keeping aside 2.5 to 3 hours every day, now you might want to keep aside a 4 hours, if possible, push that 1 hour into the night extra, right? You can compromise on your sleep and maybe, utilize an additional hour to try and finish the backlog, okay? This might be a bit of a strain the next 2 or 3 weeks. That is, after you return from college exams, for the next 2 or 3 weeks, it might be a bit of a strain, but going on a slight overdrive, trying to balance between solving the ongoing homework and the past homework is going to be very useful, because at least this load will be off, right? It's more of a psychological concern. Sometimes you'll find that it may not really affect you much, but psychologically it's quite damaging, because it gives you this feeling that there's something that I'm missing, that FOMO, the fear of missing out. There must be something that I'm missing from the previous lecture, and that's why I'm not able to get clarity, right? So work this out. To each his own, because each of you will have different schedules, but this is quite a critical matter, okay? If there's any other concern connected with this, please do post your query. Now, there is a big concern that's coming in regarding your current performance on tests, right? Whatever be the tests, benchmarking tests, or for people who are not part of the IMS curriculum, anything else, any other tests that you're taking. Now, the tests, don't equate the test to a college exam where I have studied the college syllabus, that entire syllabus. And therefore, I know I will get an 80% because I know that these areas will be covered and I understand these areas. So I have a performance there. This is very different. This is aptitude. I may not be performing well on benchmarking tests because I may have understood the concept thoroughly, but when it comes to applying all of this or solving these questions, maybe, cracking that DI set or LR set, understanding the logic involved there, bringing in that right logic, or even making the right selection, these things take time, all right? In fact, the tests in aptitude, the tests are supposed to be indicators, are supposed to be learning platforms. A test is not a final statement on where you are. A test is an insight into what you need to do. So the learning part that you get from your test is the most important one. The benchmarking tests are not your real CAT. They are the stepping stones to CAT. These are the things that will give you insights on where you are currently. Maybe as independently, I can solve these questions given a lot of time. But you start that pressure of the timer, right? Start that pressure of the clock ticking on. And I am quite nervous. I'm not able to concentrate well. Maybe my selection was wrong. Perhaps that test had, say, 20 questions. And I selected the more difficult ones. So my selection is wrong. Perhaps I targeted solving everything, and I don't need to do that. Is the 40 minutes sufficient to really solve all these questions? Maybe I chose the wrong RCs, correct? My learnings should be, yes, I will want to get to that ninja status or advanced status, which is, anything above 95 percentile. I want to get to that status. However, it takes time. How you improve on tests depends on the analysis that you do, which is where solving a test is just one part of the job. The analysis of the test is a more relevant one. How do I analyze the test? After I finish the test, I will check the solutions to the incorrect ones. I will try and resolve them. Okay, whatever it is, even if it's an RC, I will go back, I'll check the solution, what it says, but I'll go back and try and understand things myself. QA, I might try resolving that question because I got it wrong. I have to, assimilate the correct approach. There are questions that I didn't attempt. I will look at them and understand how to solve them. I will, of course, solve them. Remember, you need to solve everything, not just look at solutions and try to and believe that your mind will assimilate all these things. It doesn't happen that. You have to actually participate in it, right? So there might even be questions that I used a lot of time to solve. Maybe there's a shortcut, right? So the solutions there again will help me. The learning is important. Don't worry. No one begins at a certain level, all right? No one begins at being a 90 percentiler or whatever, right? You start slowly. The learning is what takes you to the higher levels. And if you don't focus on the learning, then that improvement really doesn't come, right? The learning and slow learning, right? Learning and the growth that comes slowly, that is the real path ahead. Okay. Even with the SIMCATs or major tests that you are going to, full-fledged mocks that you're going to take, don't expect a phenomenal 95 percentile or so straight away. You might really underperform. You might even end up with a negative score, because it can be very overwhelming when you have the 2 hours timer ticking and you have just the 40 minutes with so many questions to be done, with switching from one sectional to another sectional, which is also where your mind needs to make a shift. Don't worry about that. You know, that sense of being lost, not being able to select the right things, trying to bring the right knowledge to solving these questions, all that will happen. But the analysis is your growth ahead, which is where you have to try and finish your course curriculum by July, because after that, you focus more and more on test taking and analyzing and learning from there. There's a lot of learning. There's a world of learning that you'll get from taking tests and analyzing the tests. Now, this is another one. How to build my profile and make it strong enough for the top colleges. I don't know why this thought should come, especially to students who have a safe 10th, 12th, and grad score, right? Now, is a profile, good profile, needed or useful? Yes, it is. But for you to get that call initially, all that matters is your 10th and 12th score, right? If that is 80% and above or 90% and above, right? That is absolutely fine. If your graduate score is 80% and above, that's absolutely fine. I mean, not that even the top colleges these days, in shortlisting students and calling them for giving them the first call and calling them for the PI and the subsequent processes, it's not that all colleges consider this. A top few colleges consider, right? There may be colleges like, say, IIM Indore or IIMK that focus a little more on your academic profile, on your 10th and 12th, and less on the CAT score. They give a slightly lower weightage to the CAT score. But then if you have an 8+, that's fair enough, okay? Now, the second part. So does it matter if I have a few certifications or in internships, etc. later, once I get the call? Is it going to make a difference? Is my extracurriculars or say some community service, participation in some NGO activities, is this going to make a service? Yes, it will make a difference later, right? But the first step for you is getting a call. Let's say you're struggling with work, you're struggling with college, all right, and balancing it with CAT prep. Let's say you are barely able to, finish the homework, attend the lectures, and manage some good performance on the test. If you're struggling with this, your priority should be getting a good CAT score, right? The first thing is managing your college studies, ensuring that you do phenomenally well there. That is, if you're a 7-pointer currently, trying to push it to an 8+. If you're at a 7, maybe 7.5 at least. If you're 7.5, trying to push it beyond 8, because that is something that you can try and do. It's a controllable thing. Focus on these things first. There are students who try to take too many things. Can you manage so many things on your plate? Remember, thumb rule here should be whatever I take up, I should be able to do a meaningful job of it. If you find yourself in a comfortable position, you are able to say, manage everything, you're doing fairly well with your studies, with your CAT prep, your college is going on well, You have a couple of extra hours with you. Yes, why not look for an internship? Why not take up some courses, additional courses related to business management, right? Don't take up things that are not related. Something that is specific to business management, all right? Now, these things will make sense if you are in a situation like this where you have some additional time and you can manage things, okay? Otherwise, don't take too much on your plate. There are students who've graduated and who are not working, all right? Now, you have a lot of time at your disposal. You have an entire day. Maybe you'll put in some 5-6 hours of solving and attending the lecture. You can very well take up something additionally, all right? You can perhaps look for an internship. It will actually help you justify that gap year too, right? It will also give you some skills and some insights, some understanding of how things happen. Otherwise, you're restricted to just that theoretical knowledge that you gain from college, okay? So do actively look for some internships. Do take up some certificate programs or so, especially because you have a gap year and you have the time with you, all right? But the others, you should make CAT preparation a top priority. Of course, other than your work and your college performance, your CAT preparation should be your top priority, okay? There were students who were particularly interested in understanding. There was, I think, one question that was a particular question directed to FMS. How can I get into FMS? Now, as per this year's selection criteria, FMS gives a 50% weightage to the CAT score, a 10% weightage to your 10th and 12th each, right? 10% 10th and 10% 12th. There is going to be a discussion on the statement of purpose that you write, which is going to be a 10% weightage. An extempore, which will get a 5% weightage, and the remaining, 15% is allocated to your PI. Now, this is how the entire thing works, which means the subjective part, right, which is maybe the discussion on your SOP and maybe the PI weightage. This is the only part that's going to be influenced by your profile per se, right? The rest of the things are black and white. You have a 10th score that is 75% and above, you will get the full 10% attached, connected to it. You have a 10 score that is 60% to 75%, then you get a 5% of that score, all right? So, yes, a slightly stronger verbal sectional does help in FMS. However, focus on getting a 98 percentile, right? And therefore, this is the key part. If you're a general candidate, yes, you will want to focus on getting a 98 percentile, perhaps an 85 percentile and a little lower than that if you fall into some other categories, all right? Okay, so let's take this ahead. How can I create an effective daily routine when I'm working 12 hours days? I think this was also covered in one of our previous discussions. However, a few things that I'm going to repeat. For people who work strenuously on the work days, right? For various reasons, we can't really help it. But I have a hectic schedule during the weekdays. Most organizations have a Saturday, Sunday off, right? Even if I'm not able to put any work in during these 12-hour days because the stress of these work schedules is really too high. Let me focus on Saturdays and Sundays. But as earlier said too, as most mentors would say, you can definitely steal time here and there. Perhaps your travel time maybe can utilize to read a book, right? Or solve some Sudoku, Kakuro, some puzzles, some logic puzzles maybe. You can maybe utilize a short lunch break that you get at office, maybe if you get that. Or say a 15 minutes somewhere that you got to solving an RC, right? There might be something, there was a meeting scheduled, but it got rescheduled or postponed, or you finished the day's work and you are left with a 20 minutes or half an hour. Utilize all these small gaps of time, particularly to keep those skill sets going, all right? Particularly to do your daily routine of, say, one DI set, one RC, maybe solving a 10 QA questions, particularly connected to the practice of a certain chapter. However, the learning of new chapters, you will have to devote your Saturdays and Sundays for this. It is not possible for you to come home after a 12-hour work day. Perhaps you spend 1 or 2 hours on travel, which is like a 14-hour day, and then spend another 2-3 hours trying to focus and study that chapter as a concentrated, continuous thing. And a chapter needs to be studied continuously. You can't study a chapter in bits and pieces. That doesn't make sense, right? So utilize your Saturdays and Sundays to complete your chapters, to study those chapters, the concepts. Particularly, maybe you might want to, focus on finishing 2 chapters on a Saturday, 2 QA chapters or 1 QA chapter, 1 verbal chapter or 1 DI chapter, and then 1 more QA chapter on Sunday, because remember, quant is twice the number of concepts or chapters of the other sectionals. So 1 more QA chapter on Sunday and maybe 1 DI or, VARC, whichever you did not do, right? So every week you might want to try and cover some 3 or 4 chapters on Saturdays and Sundays, okay? For a non-engineer whose QA is weak, of course, you'll have to put in more time in QA, which is why I suggest you start with QA on Saturday, because Saturday, you might be able to give more time. Sunday, you might need half a day off for yourself, for your socializing, for whatever, catching up on Netflix or whatever. So utilize Saturday. In fact, I always advise students to set your minds, that Saturday is a working day, okay? I mean, once I accept this idea that Saturday is a non-working day, I start the day late, I wake up late, maybe half the day is lost, and then I open my books, and by then, it's mid-afternoon, and I barely get much time, right? So instead, let me treat Saturday like a regular working day, right? Perhaps if I wake up at, say, 7, I might want to wake up at 8, get that additional slight rest, 8 or 9. But I get ready as if I'm going to office, and I sit at my workplace or study place. I put in those 6-7 hours at a stretch, right? I try to focus on 1 chapter, 3 hours perhaps that I invest, or maybe there's a video of that lecture, or I'm doing the theory myself, right? Or if I belong to a weekend batch, I will obviously have my weekend lectures, right? So I might need to utilize the time after that, a little more time to do the practice solving. In any case, the homework or practice part of any chapter that is done can be split over the weekdays, right? In these half-hour slots or so, you can easily split them. But what you might not be able to complete is that benchmarking test, right? So if you have a test per chapter to be done to assess your skill sets, then that you might need to plan well on Saturdays and Sundays. At least say 1 benchmarking test on a Sunday or 1 on Saturday, and somewhere on a weekday, on a slightly, not so hectic day, maybe make that 1 hour's time. You could even split the test into 2 parts, test taking into 2 parts. That is, I take the test of 40 minutes or 50 minutes at one stretch. I do the analysis the next day, right? So that way I'm able to lighten the load and I don't need to necessarily keep that 2 hours to finish that test. But yes, your weekends will have to be maximized on. I always say maximize on your Saturday. So Sunday you can go a little easy. After all, you need time to unwind and relax, because Sunday always brings with it the idea of Monday blues, right? That comes in, which means there is an anxiety that sets in after afternoon, maybe Sunday afternoon or Sunday evening, and you're not able to do much, all right? Because somewhere, there might be some work-related concerns, some preparation for your Monday's work, etc. And that unwinding and relaxing is important. So perhaps Sunday morning is what you finish, Saturday and Sunday morning, keep the rest of Sunday to yourself. And whenever you get time, do your reading, do your solving of 1 set here and there, a few questions here and there. Also, this idea that I necessarily need to do everything is not really required, So let's say I have good reading skills, okay? Maybe I don't really need to spend a lot of time solving all practice exercises, right? Maybe even if I understand some concepts, some question types, and I do this ritual of solving 1 or 2 RCs every day, or at least 1 RC every now and then, right? That will suffice. Maybe I have a very strong mathematical background. right? I recall the concepts well. All I need is some practice to keep the momentum going. But I don't need to practice everything in the course material given. So I can pick and choose. Maybe I can drop some concept videos here and there. I could choose to do just some things, right? So this idea that everybody needs to solve everything is ideal in an ideal scenario where you have the time and therefore you want to maximize on everything. But given your limitations, focus on building on your weak areas, right? Focus more on them. And it's not necessary that you do everything. You can leave out things that you're comfortable with here and there. I'm not saying leave out one sectional completely, right? But perhaps that excess time that you want that the others put into that sectional, you can maybe skip that. Okay. Will a gap in my professional experience negatively affect my chances of admission at B schools? Well, yes, as we discussed earlier, right? That question will always come up. That is, I finished my graduation and for a year, I did nothing. I didn't take up a job, all right? So that question will always come up. You know, somewhere you will feel the need to justify that or explain it that, okay, I did nothing, but I prepared for CAT. It's always nice if you are in this situation, it's always nice for you to consider taking up an internship. You know, you surely don't need full days or 10-hour days for 10 months or 8 months to prepare for CAT, correct? You at most might be utilizing 6 hours in a day, 5-6 hours in a day to prepare for CAT. Maybe you might be investing the other time in reading and other activities. So why not think of some certificate programs? Why not think of doing something meaningful, right? And that meaningful work can be something, it could even be something that you are passionate about, maybe a hobby, right? Doing something concrete, so something tangible that you can talk about. Maybe taking up some NGO work or, you know, actively looking for some internships and taking that up. It always helps you to show something meaningful done, to show you as a learner, as a focused person, someone who wanted to give your full to CAT preparation, and therefore you didn't want to take up anything major, but you kept learning, you kept doing something, you kept growing during this time, right? So it's important for you to present it that way. All right, so these were the different questions that I had. Now, if you have any further questions here, I can surely take them up. Yes, I can see that there are a lot of questions. How to prepare for VARC and how much time I should devote for each section daily. Sachin, I think we covered that. If there's something specific, please let me know. If a person gets 100 percentile in CAT 24, any scholarship available? Are you talking about whether any college will give you a scholarship? I have not known of any Indian B schools giving scholarships, all right? So you will get admission, and that itself is a dream, right? Getting admission easily in your dream college itself is a big dream fulfilled. So I've not really heard of any scholarships being given, okay? If a person gets 100 percentile in CAT 24, is any reward available? I don't know, right? There could be, say, private organizations, say coaching centers that might give you a reward, particularly if you're enrolled with them. But other than that, B schools really wouldn't give you. At least I'm not aware of any such thing. Udit, I have completed some topics, but not getting confidence in what? Theta? Was that supposed to be theta? Udit, you might want to clarify that. I can't, it's spelled incorrectly there. Sharda, I'm able to solve questions, but my speed is not good. It takes a lot of time to solve QA questions. Huh. The initial time will be this, right? Particularly, Sharda, I suppose you are not strong at QA, right? It will take a lot of time. That is where the familiarity with the concept is important. So until and unless you're familiar and you practice these questions, it will not really, you will not really improve on time. So you might have to be just patient. Maybe even focus on solving easier QA, the easy and moderate questions, and not taking a lot of difficult questions. You don't necessarily have to solve every single question, right? Maybe focus on the more easy and moderate questions first. Be thorough with that concept, gain some confidence and move on, right? If you think that solving everything or solving very difficult questions is very time consuming for you, because this last statement of yours that you cannot get enough time for other sections, that doesn't really help you, correct? Because I have to write all three sectionals, and my sectional cutoff in all three sectionals is important, which means I have to devote at least some time for the other sections. Test analysis, Tanay, depends. If you're talking of a mock SimCat, right? A mock cat, right? It could even be a 4 hours, 3 hours to 4 hours, because there can be a lot of questions that you did not attempt, right? You will want to solve those questions too, because they are high quality questions. And that is why they have made their way into that test paper, that mock paper. So I will need to solve these unsolved questions. More important is these questions that I got wrong. I will need to learn why I went wrong there. There are several gaps that I need to identify there. I went wrong with this question because there is a knowledge gap, right? Or maybe it's a gap of application, which is I know the concept, I knew it all, I knew the formulas, but then I couldn't apply them well. Or maybe it's a gap of how I processed that question. That is, I understood the question incorrectly, right? So these learnings take time, okay? And that could take anything between 2.5 to 3 hours, and 3 to 4 hours, right? That is for a full length CAT paper, mock CAT. But if you're talking of smaller tests, a 1 hour test, a sectional test, or a chapter-based test, it can even be about 45 minutes to 1 hour, right? Depends again on different sectionals. For example, in verbal, maybe your test had 5 RCs and you were able to solve 3 RCs, right? And you didn't get a lot incorrect there. Though, of course, accuracy is always the biggest challenge in verbal, right? You can barely cross a 75% accuracy when it comes to RCs. Verbal generally. So yes, looking at those incorrect questions, maybe going back to the RC, rereading some things, and then solving those 2 pending RCs, correct? Now that takes you so much time. So maybe a 45 minutes that you invest there, or it could even come down to a 30 minutes if you're able to do that quickly. Likewise with quant, maybe with quant, you might even need to go back to some concept and see, if I really misunderstood this concept, maybe I didn't understand this well, and that's why I got this. So go back, recall the concept, relearn some things, come back and apply it to that particular question and try to process things, right? So it depends on how good you are. But I would still say that chapter test, the analysis time should be about an hour's time, right? Considering that we are looking at about 20 questions, 45 minutes to 1 hour is fine. Huge backlogs in your classes. What should I do, Anuj? Now, Anuj, it's about, so create a schedule for yourself, okay? Now, in creating a schedule, first of all, it has to be done very systematically. This point I kind of raised during a discussion of the backlog question. But if you really have a lot of backlog, remember, you have to start somewhere, okay? You cannot miss on ongoing lectures, but at the same time, you have to cover the backlog, okay? Create a proper timetable or schedule for yourself. Identify the slots of the day that you have. Let's assume you spent 8 hours in college, right? Or 8 or 9 hours, including travel time, about 9 hours. Identify that 1 or 2 hours in the morning, maybe 3, 4 hours in the evening, right? Try to split the 5 hours that you're able to get in a day, 5 hours or 4 hours, into 2 hours for finishing your backlogs and 2 hours for working with the current thing. So create a very clear schedule. And as I said, if you really have backlog, you might have to go on an overdrive, a slight overdrive. I'm not even saying that you need to skip on sleep. I come across students who tell me that, ma'am, I sit up till 2 a.m., 1 a.m. preparing. Now, you don't really need to burn yourself out this way, at least not so early. Invest just those 4 or 5 hours. 3 hours is what we talked about. If you have backlogs, maybe an additional 2 hours, right? So a 5 hours. The sitting up till late in the night can come at a much later stage. Obviously, when it comes to the month of, say, September, October, you will end up investing more hours because of your, anxiety, because you're not doing well in one sectional, maybe your SimCAT scores are not going well. So till then, don't compromise on your sleep and your health. Do get that 6 to 7 hours of sleep, right? So don't invest too much time, at least not now. But if you plan this well, if you can, for the next 2, 3 weeks, invest an additional 2 hours or an additional 2.5 hours, I'm sure you should be able to manage this. But this is about discipline, Anuj, right? This is about perseverance. This is about, taking up a task and keeping oneself motivated enough to do that. Okay, so that's where the habit creation is important. I create these habits for myself. First week it's a struggle. First few days, I just can't sit up and sit at a stretch for 2 hours and do some solving, but I do that. I force myself to do that. I force myself for 5 days, 6 days, and then I find that in a week or 2 weeks time it becomes a habit with me. It doesn't become so unnatural, right? So habit creation is a very important thing. JB Mumbai is at par with which I am. So JB, we place in the top category. So we have categories, we have classifications of colleges, and our top college category, the A1 category as we call it, including the top IIMs, which is IIM A, B, C, and then we have all the others, the black eye colleges, Lucknow, Indore, Kozhikode, XLRI, FMS, SP Jain, and yes, JB as well. All right. So I would say that this is placed in the top category, right? A1 or A2, close to A2. We don't really equate it to, so we don't go college wise and say that this is a better ranked college than any other, right? All I can say is this is categorized in the top category. It is definitely one of the top 10 colleges of the country, all right? Okay, in that, Udit, completed, but not getting confidence in that. So, Udit, the confidence that you get in certain topics that you've completed will have to do with revision. Okay. When I learn some skill sets first, say I learn swimming or I learn a game, right? I learn the fundamentals, but I'm not really confident just after those fundamental classes. I need a lot of practice, right? For me to become an expert swimmer or for me to become a champion player in that sport, I need to put in immense practice, right? So believe in this. You would put in hours and hours of practice for a sport that you're passionate about. Please put in more practice and become familiar with things, right? That familiarity automatically will give you confidence. Okay. It's just about putting more hours in. I know that, with every such specific query, we seem to be creating more and more demands of, practice and your schedule. But then there is no other way, right? If you are, say, aspiring to become a national level cricketer, look at the number of hours that you'll put in there, right? It's a dedication. So think of it that way, all right? Don't think of it as some sort of additional pressure that I'm forced to do all of this, okay? If I want to become confident, I revisit things. I relook at, say, the concepts, I revise, I practice more and more, okay? Give yourself time. Okay, wait for the entire, as I said, for quant and DILR concepts specifically, quant primarily, that one more revision will give you more confidence. Okay, you're doing all of this for the first time, isn't it, Uday? So it takes time. Okay, but be at it. Remember that you don't become a national champion or you don't become expert at a game overnight. You put in many more hours and days and weeks of practice, right? So equate this to the same. After all, we're looking at building skill sets. It's not about, knowing the knowledge of a subject and simply bringing it out on an answer paper, like what we usually do in schools and colleges. This is about developing skills, okay, and applying those skills. Anuj, I'll come back to that question in a moment. Let me just check if there are how to effectively analyze a SIMCAT or mock. Okay, that's a good question, Komal. So Anuj, yeah, let me get back to your specific query. Currently in your second year, BCom fourth sem, your age is 19 when I will give CAT exam. You're in fourth sem now. Yeah, so next year you will be passing out in 25 May, isn't it? As long as you pass out in 25, before you seek admission, that's absolutely fine. Yes. Okay. So you take CAT 24. CAT 24 score is meant for admission to B schools for the 25 program, correct? Which generally starts in, June, July, August, right? July, usually July. It's not about young, Anuj. It's about uh, it's about finishing your graduation, right? If you've completed your graduation, you're eligible for a post-graduation, right? If you're saying that you're a fresher and you don't have the experience, as I said, it doesn't matter, right? There are people without experience, freshers. There are some X number of seats, 30-40% seats that are reserved for freshers. So don't worry about that. Everybody doesn't necessarily need to have work experience, okay? There are work experience people that are, very consciously taken by B schools, but there are companies that also look for freshers for certain roles, specifically for freshers, because they want to train them well in that particular role. Udit, I got 13 correct from 25 in benchmarking test. Should I go ahead? Oh, yes, absolutely. Do an analysis of the incorrect ones and solve the ones that you did not solve. Understand, how difficult or what was, why you could not attempt that. That's enough and move on, right? When you revise, right, you can always come back to some more questions from these tests, etc. This can be done later. 13 correct is a good score, right? I'm not saying it's bad, right? It is fair enough for now. Depends again on the topic, but it's fair enough for now. So, if you're able to, so, the way in which we've ranked our benchmarking tests, you get an 80%, below 80%, you are at a learner stage, correct? You get an 80% to 95% correct, then you are at a capable stage. You get a 95 to 99, you are at an advanced stage, and you have a ninja status if you have a 99 and above that. Now, whatever category you fall into, let's say you come in the 80, below 80 range, right? Below 80 percentile range. You might want to check those questions, okay, that you got wrong, those questions that you did not attempt, solve them again. Use the AI revise feature, right? There is the AI adaptive questions that you get, right? Revision questions. Use them, solve some more of the questions till you get them right. You will have these AI questions coming up, right? Till you get that particular question right. So 2 or 3 such questions, solve them and then move on. That's enough, right? The whole point of that is that you have to learn these various things. So if you got 13 questions, right, maybe you attempted some 18 questions, you got some 5 incorrect perhaps, and then there are some questions that you could not attempt, correct? Now, solve those questions, the incorrect ones, the ones that you could not attempt, give yourself some time and then just move on. That's enough, all right? Don't worry. So this level is for you to know where you stand, right? Imagine if you are able to get a 95% and above in a percentile and above in a certain test, it is going to make you very happy, isn't it? That, okay, I've solved this completely. I know this, okay? So Komal, now there will be very detailed analysis videos and analysis insights that we will give you with regard to mock cats or SIMCATs, okay? The analysis that you need to do will have to be broken into several parts. The first focus will be on the questions that you got wrong, okay? This is clearly an issue with your learning, right? Because I took that question because I thought I knew it, all right? But then I went wrong in applying my knowledge there. I will have to check on what went wrong in applying knowledge. Now, that is precisely a problem of knowledge application. There can be those questions that you did not attempt, right? Now, your did not attempt can be for multiple reasons. Maybe you couldn't reach that question at all, that set. You weren't able to see that because you only looked at the first 2 or 3 sets and chose the first or second one, right? You weren't able to see the fourth RC at all. So solve the ones that you did not solve also, because they are good questions and you cannot afford to miss good questions, okay? So the focus should be first on solving those incorrect questions and checking the correct things, solving the questions that you haven't solved. Third, there are those questions that you solved, right? But even when you solved, you had this thought in your mind that maybe it's taking a lot of time. Perhaps you thought you might be able to do that question in about 2, 3 minutes, but you ended up taking some 5, 6 minutes. Now you know that is a problem, right? You got it right though. That set was supposed to be done in about 15 minutes, but you ended up taking a 25 minutes or 30 minutes. That is poor selection. You know that, correct? Now, or maybe it is not poor selection. Maybe that was an easy set, but you got stuck with something. This is where you will need to check uh, on the solutions and see if there are easier ways of doing it. Are there shortcuts and then you didn't use it, right? So these 3 things are important, right? The first is the knowledge gap or efficiency gap, right? I have the knowledge, but I'm not applying that well. The second is, not having done some questions. So maybe my learning there, or, could be some reason. Maybe I misread that question as a tough one. I misunderstood. That judgment is important, correct? Judging questions to be easy, to be moderate, to be difficult. That's also very important. That learning is very important because every mock, you have to build on that judgment. What is an easy question? What is a difficult one? What is a moderate one? In fact, that judgment is also what you build from your early test taking. You start with your benchmarking, and from your benchmarking too, you build on this sense of judgment. The recognition of, you're not supposed to solve all 20 questions or 25 questions in those 40 minutes or 50 minutes, right? You select a few questions, right? It's just not possible. And as I said, you're only looking to get a 50% target score or 60% target score. So selecting the easy ones, recognizing them, recognizing the difficult ones and letting them go, recognizing the time-consuming questions and letting them go, recognizing an RC that is going to take you a lot of time to read because that is not a subject that you are comfortable with, or it's an abstract RC. You don't relate to the language of that RC, right? Now, these things are important. So that judgment, the recognition of easy, moderate, difficult, the incorrect ones, the unsolved ones, the correct ones for easier strategies. These are the things that you analyze in your SimCat, okay? And you systematically note these things down. You perhaps maintain an Excel chart and you note these things down. You write down what was difficult at what point, what was easy, what mistake did you make, observing those. Simply noticing that is not enough. Noting that down, writing that down is important, so that is how you remember from one mock to the next. Okay, in the last mocks, I was making this mistake. So I have to consciously not make that mistake. I have to read the data. I haven't been reading the question stem properly, right? The instruction. So remembering all these things are very important. Udit, not able to solve the CAT questions of that topic, which is done. Give yourself time, Udit, okay? Give yourself time. It will take a little while, okay? Maybe you can even, so if there are those difficult questions and you're not able to solve, maybe even look at the solutions first and then try to solve them, right? Go through the solution, understand how the approach is done and practice accordingly, right? Solve it out accordingly. It will take time. Be a little more patient. I know that sometimes we are very anxious. I finished this chapter, I finished module 1, I should be really good at this. But be a little patient with yourself, but persevere. Be determined, be committed, continue doing this. Utkarsh, small town TY BMS student internship opportunities are very limited. I'm gonna go for a gap year this year after my graduation. NSIM certification should be, yes. But NSIM certificate again in something specific, something related to management. Okay, don't make it unrelated. If you're, and at least that will give you an understanding of some other area. Okay, you are already a BMS student. Okay, something related, right? Something related to your interests, to something that will help you with, your curriculum at B school. All right, yeah. Okay, so that's about it. It looks like. Thank you so much. I'm going to wrap up now. And if there's anything more, I'm sure you can always, put your queries, post your queries in the comment section, and we'll surely get back to you. You'll find all the different links and different programs connected with IMS also put in the bio and the comment section. Please do take a look at that. And for further queries, post your queries. We will respond to them, right? Thank you all for joining me today. Have a great Sunday, and let's, look afresh at your CAT 24 preparation. All the best.